Good day. Welcome to the CAEF Web Talk, Why Fighting Antisemitism Fails and How to Fix It, featuring my guest today, Joshua Hoffman. I'm Andrea Spindle, Executive Director of the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation, a federally registered charitable organization which, since 2001, has been raising the alarm about rising anti-Semitism while building relations with allies, promoting justice for Jews and for all Canadians based on shared values. Those values must be brought to the fore in the battle we are now facing, a battle against extremism that potentially affects every Canadian. As Dr. Charles Jacobs recently pointed out, we're already facing a five-alarm fire, though not everyone is yet feeling the heat, but it will eventually burn others if not quenched now. This fire is fueled by Islamism, leftism, and extreme right-wing ideologies. The current environment in this country, as well as in many Western countries, and of course in New York City, is normalizing Jew hatred, attempting to isolate Israel via the spread of hate-motivated propaganda, falsehoods that use the language of human rights, shielding Jew hatred as anti-Zionism. This web talk will not address the raging Jew hatred of the Iranian theocratic regime, nor the Qatari-funded media and academic campaigns to delegitimize the Jewish state. These are both background items that fuel the fight we are in today. Our mass media, cultural institutions, and even political parties have either been hijacked, infiltrated, or bought off to support ahistorical, blameworthy falsehoods disguised as equity-seeking, balancing views. If we don't give equal time to the fakery of the Nakba while memorializing the Holocaust, then we're ruled as guilty of discrimination or the slander of Islamophobia. Before our speaker addresses the hugely significant topic of our community's failure to beat back anti-Semitism, I would like to acknowledge and thank our co-sponsors who are true allies in this battle. Tavsik, the Mattathias Project, the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem in Canada, the Ludger Center Congregation, Beth Tikva Synagogue, Toronto Zionist Council, Canadian Women Against Antisemitism, the Coalition of Hindus of North America, the J.ca, Club Z, Americans for a Safe Israel, the Massachusetts Anti-Semitism Synagogue Task Force, Muslims Facing Tomorrow, Canadians for Israel, and the Israel Activist Calendar. It means a great deal to have this breadth of support and to acknowledge allies from other faith communities. My special guest today is Joshua Hoffman, a Los Angeles native who made Aliyah in 2013 and now resides in Tel Aviv, though I was pleasantly surprised to hear that he's in Montreal today. I first met Joshua in the early 2020s when he launched Izzy, an Israeli streaming service that features great movies and TV shows available in Hebrew, but also dubbed or captioned in English. He has since sold his portion of the company and went full steam in launching another creative enterprise, Future of Jewish. This is a digital platform which publishes daily essays and podcasts reflecting on Judaism, Israel, and the Jewish world. And I can tell you that the range of topics covered and the quality of his writing and that of other contributors is excellent. Joshua is author of 3 books, all available on Amazon, his most recent being Journeys of the Jewish Spirit, in which he explores diversity within Judaism. Joshua studied journalism at San Diego State University, and prior to making Aliyah, he worked as a sports journalist and broadcaster. But it's his provocative writing that led me to request his participation in a webinar, and I was really struck by the title he suggested. So, Joshua, why are we failing to stop anti-Semitism, and what are we going to do about it?
Thank you for having me, and thank you for that great intro, and thank you to the sponsors and the co-sponsors, and to you, Andrea. Um, so I'll address the top of the conversation, and I really like to move as quickly as possible into a Q&A format. I'm sure people, when they see the title, which is a very provocative title and a very significant title, there's probably a lot of questions that arise just from that, and then I'm sure some of the things that I'll say, which might also be provocative or different, might create questions. And I'd love to create not just my monologue, but a dialogue that hopefully we can all have together for the majority of the time we have today.
Could I just add then, Joshua, we'd
Go
like the
ahead.
people listening to put their questions in the Q&A function, not in the chat, so we can focus on that. You're welcome to share information in the chat, tell us where you're listening in from, but please use Q&A.
Perfect.
Go ahead.
So yeah, so I think I listed a few reasons of why I think anti-Semitism or the fight against it, combating anti-Semitism, is not succeeding. When we use the word fail, I think people get defensive, and especially people that work in the organized Jewish world, whether it be institutions or synagogues or JCCs or people that work in or for Israel in different capacities. Um, so I think we have to understand that we're not reaching our full potential. We're not succeeding at the level that we could and should be. That's definitely within reach, within our resources, within our creativity, our innovation as a people. Obviously, Israel is one of the most innovative and creative countries on the planet. So we have all the resources and the tools and the abilities in our disposal. It's really a question of, I think, trying to get everyone on the same page, if that's possible in the Jewish world, and then being more strategic and maybe changing some things about how things have been done up until now, which I'll get to. So the first thing I would say is that I think there's an over-reliance on outrage and moral appeals in the Jewish world. So well, let's break that up for a second. Outrage is we wait for anti-Semitism to happen, uh, and then we get really upset. And they're like, why is it happening? Right? So it's more reactive than what I would call proactive. You can't be proactive 100% of the time, and there is always going to be times where you're going to have to be reactive. But I find that on the whole, most of what we're doing is reactive as opposed to proactive. And I think if we can balance that out 50-50, 60-40, I think we'll be a lot more successful. The second part is moral appeals. I'm a cynic. When I moved to Israel, I don't know how many people know, there's like superficial Israeli culture, which everyone kind of knows, but then there's like deep Israeli culture, which some people might know, but some people might not. And one of them is Israelis are incredible cynics, and sometimes to a fault. And I, living in Israel for a long time, have also become a cynic. And so when we make moral appeals about anti-Semitism, I'm going to say something very controversial, but I fundamentally believe it. There is no such thing as singular morality. There's not a morality, or if you want to call it universalism, that all 8 billion people or 7 billion, whatever the number is, agree to. And nor should they, and nor should we expect them to. The Jewish people are responsible for the Jewish people. We're not responsible for the entire world. We're not responsible for other religions. We're not responsible for other cultures. If we are outraged or upset, it's not on us to convince other people. Okay, if they want to create natural allies, that's a different thing. But we don't have to morally appeal to anyone. We have to come together and figure out how we're going to do what we have to do, which is a very similar um, dynamic that Israel takes as a country. Israel has to worry about Israel. It's not Israel's job to worry about Jordan and Egypt and Syria and Lebanon and Saudi Arabia. Yeah, if there's natural alliances between certain countries, economic, cultural, socio-political, great. But Israel has to take care of itself, and the Jewish people have to take care of ourselves. And trying to appeal morally to other groups of people, I don't find to be effective. The second thing I'll say is that we try to, whether it's purposeful or inadvertent, a lot of people in the Jewish world are trying to create alliances. Well, around different, well, they're all big, anti-Semitism and being racist against Black people or against Islamophobia or whatever you want. We all group it into the same thing, right? So this grouping of hatreds, of bigotries, of prejudices, of discriminations, whatever you want to call it, I find to be, I understand why we do it. There's sort of a interpersonal, like we want to relate to each other, and that's a very human thing. But I also find it to be very intellectually lazy because the reasons why, for example, anti-Black racism exists in the United States are far different than the reasons that anti-Semitism exists in Canada or in the US or in parts of the Middle East or in Europe or wherever. And so when we group those things together, you can't treat the different problems with the same solution. And when you group things together, it's one solution for everything, and I don't think that's very effective. Um, the third thing I would say is that anti-Semitism has become very politicized, and um, that creates issues because, as we all know, politics is kind of like a sports team today, and you can't say anything bad about your team, even when there's plenty of things bad to be said. And we have a situation now where we have, and I'm simplifying because we don't have, hours on hours here. So excuse me for a little bit of an oversimplification. But unfortunately, we have a big problem in the Jewish world, including in Israel, where if I belong to a certain political party, or if I vote for a certain political party or even a specific politician, then uh, you know, um, I can't call out anti-Semitism in that party or within that politician or what have you. And I find that to be very lame, just lame. Um, to me, anti-Semitism is anti-Semitism. I might vote for a party because my core issues, maybe it's the economy, maybe it's public safety, maybe it's education, whatever my core issues are, align with a certain party or politician. But that doesn't mean that I have to excuse, overlook, or ignore anti-Semitism in that same party or within that same politician. To me, one thing has nothing to do with the other. And I have to decide as an individual, am I willing to like what's more important? Are certain issues more important to me, or is the anti-Semitism? But just to completely ignore it, overlook it, discredit it, gaslighting, that to me is unacceptable. And that goes for the same thing with people on the right and the left, secular, religious, American, Canadian, Canadian, European, European, Israeli. I think it's ridiculous, and it really needs to stop because it's not helpful. It's not productive. Um, And so now we move into how to fix those things that I just mentioned. I'm going to start with a few kind of what I'll call quick fixes. They're not quick fixes in reality, but I'm going to hit on them very quickly and move on to the next one. And then I'm going to end with uh, the most important one, which is the one that I want to spend the most time talking about, and then we'll go into the Q&A. So the first thing that I thought, or the last thing I talked about was the politicization of anti-Semitism. So I think we have to move away from that. And I think every person here to an extent could be guilty of that. And we have to kind of look at ourselves in the mirror and say, I can like a candidate in our party for A, B, and C reasons, but I can also it's not either or. It's and I can like this and also not be okay with this and not be afraid to speak up and uh voice my concerns about anti-Semitism within a party or regarding a certain candidate. And I just want to be clear that we all understand what the actual definition of fascism is, because we throw this word around. I'm American. I'm an American Israeli citizen at this point, dual citizenship, but I'm American, and I only speak for Americans. I definitely don't want to speak for Canada because I don't fully understand the political climate here. But in America, I'll just say Donald Trump gets labeled a fascist. Okay, I accept that on face value if I'm just saying for argument's sake. So he's a fascist. But the definition of fascism is not being is basically lack of free speech or speaking up and being oppressed or being penalized. And so if people on the left in America uh can't speak up against anti-Semitism within their own party because they're being feared of being canceled, ostracized, kicked out of certain social groups, kicked out of their workplace, not being accepted or whatever, that's actually fascism. Like that's by definition fascism. So like it's hard for me to empathize with a group of people that is accusing another group of doing the very things that they're doing. So like I think we need to be, and I think Canadians can relate to that in different ways. Like I said, I don't know enough about Canadian politics and I don't want to pretend to. And I'm sure Europeans can kind of take what they want, the Australians, et cetera, and say, maybe I shouldn't be accusing other people of doing things that we're also guilty of doing, or maybe not I'm personally guilty, but people in my party. So definitely being able to speak up about all types of anti-Semitism, I think, is absolutely necessary. Um, I think this has been talked about a lot by different people, so I don't, this is definitely not an original thought, but I think this idea of creating alliances is frankly overrated. I'm not saying that there's no benefit, but if I'm looking at cost benefit analysis, I see far more costs in terms of energy, resources, money, time than I do benefits when we create alliances with different, other nonprofits and different, other religions, other socio-political things that I think at the end of the day we have to turn inward as the Jewish people and start there. Now, if we do that and we do that well, and then we want to do things that are more outward, I think that's fine. But I find oftentimes that we're actually doing more things outward in terms of alliance building or, even organizing certain types of events than we are internally. And that to me is an issue. So I would like to see more inward um, sort of unity, but also collaboration, teamwork first take a priority over outward alliances and things of that nature. Um, Not easy to do in the Jewish world, by the way. I'm not saying that's something easy to do. There's a lot of ego, a lot of opinions, a lot of obviously we know there's a lot of issues in the Jewish world, which is not uncommon. I have Armenian friends, they have the same issue in the Armenian world. I think the Muslim world has issues as well with the Christian Catholic world. So there's a lot of issues, but all these issues, in my opinion, can be talked through if we're all fighting for the same thing. If we're not, then that's a different story. But if we're all fighting for the same thing in terms of Jewish continuity, strength, not just to survive, but to thrive, to help the societies that we live in. If we're all interested in those kind of things, then I think there's a way forward where um, there can be more collaboration and teamwork and understanding within the Jewish world itself. Um, And the last thing I'll say before I move into the big one is enough with this is anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism nonsense. I don't even think we need to be calling anti-Zionism, even naming it. It's anti-Semitism. And I would even go a step further and say, I'm just going to call you a Nazi from now on. I'm not calling you a pro-Palestinian. I'm not calling you an anti-Zionist. I'm calling you either an anti-Semite or a Nazi because that's effectively what it is. Now, people can have different opinions about that. That's my personal opinion, and everyone isn't obviously entitled to their own opinion. But this nonsense that of this really, excuse my language, of bullshit nuance that, well, anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, there's times when it's not. We don't live in a world of absolutes. We live in a world of majority minority. The majority of the time, I'm talking upwards of 70, 80%, Zionism is anti-Semitism. Yeah, I know there's exceptions, 10%, 20%, but I can't solve for the minority. I have to solve for the majority. And therefore, if anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism 70, 80% of the time, then that is what it is. And so when we get caught up in these debates, especially in the Jewish world, I don't need to prove anything to anyone outside the Jewish world. But within the Jewish world, when we start having debates about anti-Zionism versus anti-Semitism, it's historically illiterate because there is no difference between uh, or there is no Zionism without Judaism, and there's no Judaism without Zionism as a historical fact. Um, and if we can't even agree on that, then we can't even communicate that to the outside world. And so I think that's a big thing here is I wouldn't even say anti-Zionism anymore. It's anti-Semitism. I'm not interested in your nuance because the nuance is a very small percentage of the bigger picture. The bigger and so I'll leave it at that. Now, the thing that I think is most important, and this is not also an original idea. In fact, everything I've said here today is almost none of this is an original idea. As Andrea said, I run a platform called Future of Jewish. We have literally hundreds of guest writers. I also write several essays for the platform. So I'm actually just kind of synthesizing for everyone here um, what's been written on my platform and by other people, mostly a little bit by me, research I've done, books I've read, videos I've watched, people I've talked to in Israel and Europe, in the US and Canada. I've talked to Jews all over the world by now, rabbis, cantors, community organizers, volunteers, uh, et cetera, including Israeli politicians even. Um, so I'm actually just synthesizing a lot of what I'm telling you. And so one of the things that I've picked up on, which I think is the single most important thing that we should all be focused on, is the best way to combat or minimize the effects of anti-Semitism is actually has nothing to do with anti-Semitism and has everything to do with Jews and the Jewish people. And I fundamentally believe that it starts with Jewish pride, which is honestly the most cliche way that you can put it when you think about it. Jewish pride. Okay, yeah, we're all proud to be Jewish. But I think one of the issues is that um, the way that Jewish pride is instilled amongst Jews today, I think that system is a little broken. And so the system that I see today is it's a very top-down approach. It's we have a lot of organizations, and a lot of the organizations are doing great work, by the way. So I'm not trying to imply that they're not, but it's a matter of fact that we have a lot of organizations, and in order to kind of do Jewish up until recently, like before the internet, you kind of had to go to like the synagogue or the JCC or the Jewish Day School or to Israel. Um, and that's a lot of that's changed, especially with the advent of the internet. And I think now the single most important place that a Jew can start to become a proud Jew is actually in the home, which now takes us from a top-down environment where it's all about organizations and the individual has to find his or her place within these organizations to now bottom up. If it starts in the home and not the Beit Midrash, the study hall, which is basically the synagogue, etc., and then there's extensions of that, which is a JCC, day school, etc. Now, all of a sudden, we're looking not only at a top-down formula, but also a bottom up. And I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I actually think one strengthens the other and vice versa. And so I'll take you through kind of a timeline, an example timeline of how I see this happening. And there's many timelines, and we cannot go into all of them. So I'm just going to give you uh, one sort of generic timeline. So when I say it starts in the home, it really starts with the parents, right? And so especially for kids that are born and raised outside of Israel, Israel, as most of us know, you kind of built in Judaism, right? I mean, you don't have to send your kid to a Jewish school because basically all the schools are Jewish schools, and everyone celebrates the Jewish holidays because those are the national holidays. But in the diaspora, you do have to kind of make an effort, I would say, right? To like, do I send my kid to a public school or to a Jewish school? Do I send my kid to a summer camp that where they go play sports, or do I send my kid to a Jewish summer camp? So those are the kind of things, right, that we know a lot of parents have to grapple with. But I think that today it's not mutually exclusive. I mean, I think today, for example, if you have a young kid in your home, and let's just start with a 4-year-old boy named Jonathan, and he loves uh, cartoons, and he's 3 or 4 years old. So now every parent today, for the most part, has the ability to show that kid, find on YouTube or other places on the internet, a variety of cartoons. And I think it would be great to, yeah, he can watch Superman and those, but show him some Israeli cartoons, show him some Jewish cartoons. And then as that boy gets older, now he's 6 and he loves eggs. His favorite thing is eggs. So yeah, I can make him a frittata and I can make him an but also make him shakshuka. And I think starting to bring things in from the home where it's not so much about, oh, I need to send him to a preschool, and then I need to send him to a day school, and then I need to send him to Hebrew school. Those things are important too, and I'll get to that in a second. But I think there's baby steps that can happen from a young age as the child gets older that, then Jonathan becomes 10, 11 years old. Now he loves soccer. And we live in, let's say we live in Los Angeles, and the team in Los Angeles for the soccer team is the Galaxy. So Jonathan wants to go to watch Galaxy games in person on TV. Well, as a parent, I can say, there's also really good soccer players in Israel. Why don't we watch a Maccabi Tel Aviv game once in a while? Or why don't we follow some of the so I'm just saying that's where I see this sort of bottom up approach happening. Now, the beautiful thing about the bottom up approach is that we're all social beings and we like to be around people that like what we like and that think the way we think. And so as Jonathan's growing up, naturally he's going to want to uh for example, if you make him shakshuka and he loves it, maybe you can find him a Jewish cooking class, or maybe the local JCC offers a Jewish or Israeli cooking class, or you know, he likes playing soccer. Maybe we can sign up for the regular soccer team in LA, or maybe he can join, maybe there's a Jewish youth league. So naturally, it comes back to those organizations, whether it's synagogues or JCCs. But I think that we're missing a big part because right now we're asking the institutions to do a lot of the what I'll call Jewish pride establishment and installation and um, uh, constant reminder, which is something that happens outside of the home, versus stuff that you can start with in the home that are easy things to do, that naturally people will gravitate to those organizations to get more of those things and to be around other people that like those things. The second part I'll say is that it's never been easier to do this because it's not just about religion or Israel, or there's so many different things that we can choose from today in the Jewish world. Food, art, history, philosophy, ethics, religion, spirituality, Israel, Hebrew. So there's so many different starting points that you can get a kid. And what I often find is that uh, I think we have 100 doors that somebody can walk through, especially kids. They walk through one door, they're going to want to check out some of the others. So they might come in for the food, but then they're going to stay for the religion. They might come in for the religion, but then they're going to also stay for the philosophy. And the last thing I'll say on this point is that it doesn't just have to be kids. Anyone can start this process. Anyone can sign up for Izzy, the streaming platform that I started, and start watching more Israeli TV shows not instead of Netflix, but in addition to Netflix or in addition to whatever you watch. I think we're now at a point where we don't need to solely rely on the institutions to instill and develop that Jewish pride. I think it's more incumbent on parents now more than ever. And of course, that opens up the conversation about should Jews be marrying Jews and how to raise your kids, which we can talk about too. But I just think that Jewish pride is the most important ingredient here because what does Jewish pride represent? It's not just about being proud to be Jewish. That's the means to the end. The end is that if more people are proud to be Jewish, that means you're more literate in Judaism, in Jewish history, in Jewish scripture, potentially in different parts of the Jewish world. Now you can actually stand up for yourself when you're faced with all this pro-Palestinian, whatever you want to call it. Right now, a lot of Jews, whether they're 12, 22, 32, even 52, can't really stand up for themselves, not in a physical way, but just in having a conversation and having the tools to be able to basically defend ourselves. And, if you look at, I go back to Israel as a great microcosm for this. I mean, this is why Israel is successful, because from a young age, the kids are on a kind of I don't want to call it a singular path, but there's a clear path that ultimately leads to the IDF, which ultimately leads to the defense of the country and the innovation that comes out of the IDF, which oftentimes makes its way into the private sector as well. But the average Israeli is very proud, is very proud. They're rooted there and it's deep. It's not superficial. And I find that we're missing something in the diaspora, and I'm generalizing, of course, but we're missing something in the diaspora, especially amongst young people. If they just don't have the pride and therefore the tools and the strength, the emotional strength, the mental strength, the literate strength to combat the forces that are basically what we can call anti-Semitism. And if we can do a better job of having both the top down and the bottom up, and then they meet together and they make each other stronger, as I said, then that to me is where the Jewish strength and the Jewish unity is going to come from. And that right there minimizes anti-Semitism because you're not going to ever get rid of the anti-Semites, but you can minimize the effects of anti-Semitism. And I think that's really what the conversation should be about. Saying combating anti-Semitism is nonsense. Fighting anti-Semitism, and I'm sorry, and I'm sorry if there's some people here who've donated a lot of money or a lot of their time to the so-called fight against anti-Semitism. I don't think it's about fighting anti-Semitism per se. I think it's about fighting the effects of it and specifically how it affects the Jewish people and the Jewish state. And if we can minimize the effects, then it becomes anti-Semitism in a way becomes kind of a losing cause. I think right now a lot of anti-Semites feel empowered and feel justified because we as a people are greatly affected by their actions and their words. And if we can minimize the effects that those action that anti-Semitism has on us, then I think you'll see all of a sudden anti-Semitism becomes kind of a losing game for them. And so that also, I think, has an interesting psychological effect on uh, potentially minimizing anti-Semitism or disincentivizing it, if you will. And so, with that being said, I'd love to open it up for conversation. I know I left a lot of things open-ended, which is normal in a 20-minute conversation monologue, but I'd be happy to get to questions and stay for as long as necessary to address as many as possible.
Joshua, I think you've given us a lot to think about, and I do have some some questions in mind based on what you said. To start with, what I don't disagree, I'm sure most people would agree that Jewish pride is very fundamental. And I think you expressed it very well with all the examples you gave of how we need to inculcate that. But we're already at a point where we have a whole generation, two or three, that didn't get that education. And we're dealing with those young people who are seeing anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, whatever, weaponized. They're on campuses. Our lovely, young, intelligent kids who have liberal values have to stand up to this. Do you have any
Right.
suggestions on how to talk to those kids who don't already have an education? And they're really the ones at the front line taking the beating.
100%. It's a good question. I'll try to answer it in a concise way because there's obviously a lot of layers to a lot of these issues. Um, what's interesting to me is that there's no um, like the main thing today is the smartphone, right? That's the thing that we're worth actually the most amount, right? It's always in our pocket, it's always on our desk. If we're in our home, we know exactly where it is, if it's not on us already. And so what's interesting is that there's no Jewish app. Like there's literally an app for everything. I mean, there's an app for finding clean public restrooms. Being
Yeah.
100% serious. That's the whole point of the app. You open the app, it knows your location, it tells you within a few hundred meters where's the cleanest public restroom. Okay, there's tons of examples of the most random apps and use cases, and yet there's no Jewish app. There's not. Can anyone think of it? I don't know a single one. I know there's if you go on the App Store, you'll and type in Jewish or Israel, you'll find something. But when I said there's no Jewish app, I mean there's nothing that people are using, uh, frankly, on a day-to-day basis. The same way that they're using Instagram, not just on a day-to-day basis, but multiple hours a day or Netflix or whatever. And so I would start there with the young people, especially, is where's our daily um, engagement with Judaism. Again, part of the problem with the top-down approach is that if I have to go somewhere to be Jewish or to do Jewish, then there's chances are I'm not going to be doing that every day. I'm not going to most people are not going to the synagogue every day. Most people are not going to the So what are the things that we can be doing on a day-to-day basis, whether it's movies or social, whatever it is, that we can be getting and strengthening that bond. And so what I would say is that any donor who's really upset or bothered by this demographic that you mentioned, uh, it's not contacting the administration and getting a bunch of lawyers to sue. I mean, that's part of it, but like the Qataris are coming in and saying we'll pay for all the lawsuits and we have unlimited money. So it's like that's not a winning cause. Like that might be a side kind of strategy, but like get something in the students' hands that they are excited about, that they're uh, the same way that they're excited to open Instagram, they should be excited to open this. And if you can get that into their hands and start that way, then I think inherently you move to the next step, which is them defending themselves, them not putting up with it. Then you can bring in the lawyers and they can do the lawyer things. But that's where I would start if you're talking about young people.
You just referred to the Qataris, and I'd like to pick that up too, because while you were saying, and I was struggling with the idea that maybe we don't start with building allyship, it seems to me that the Jewish population, being so small, really needs allies to even be noticed, in particular in Canada. You've got 6 million Jews in the US. Do you know that in Canada, we're under 400,000, less than 1% of the population? So we're not important. It seems to most people that the Muslim vote is what the governments or parties are looking for. And I think the bigger fear is not just how we're being insulted or Israel's being denigrated, but the potential harm, real danger is what happens on the streets when people get beaten up or in the US killed. We haven't had to live through that yet, but I imagine it could happen. So if people if a bigger vote is against us, where does that take us? How are we going to stop the weaponization, if you like, that you spoke of, weaponization of anti-Semitism?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm going to give a response that is not exactly apples to apples, and but I think is worth trying. Um, And I'm actually an entrepreneur I was a journalist and then I became an entrepreneur and an entrepreneur is all about solving problems. And there's many examples of what you're talking about as a problem. There's a problem that we're outnumbered and um and yeah, we're outnumbered. And so the way that I look at that is I look at in the business world, um there's plenty of examples of what they call startups who have less than 1% the amount of employees of a big company like that they're competing against, and yet they disrupt the industry. They have way less of everything, less money, less people, less connections, and yet they come and they disrupt the industry. And the reason I think they do that is because they're better organized, they're better focused. The bigger the company, it's hard to manage more people. Yes, you have more money, but you have more problems, more. There's a lot of baggage that comes with having more. And I think actually if you can, and it's the same thing with Israel, by the way. Israel doesn't have more people than other countries in the Middle East, but it does have a better job of organizing, specifically the military and being more nimble, if you will. And if you have less people, you have to get less people on board when you make decisions. I mean, there are some advantages to being less. When it comes to the voting aspect, that's where the business analogy might not be completely apples to apples. But what I will say is that if there's 400,000 Jews in Canada, I mean, you should all be rowing in the same boat, in the same boat to the same direction. If you do that, you'd be surprised at what kind of impact that can make, potentially electorally, potentially financially, socially, but it's all contingent on coming together toward a common cause. And that's how the state of Israel was founded, by the way. I think anyone who knows the history, I mean, that there was a lot of competing groups
Mhm.
with Israel and Zionism, a lot. I mean, and I'm not talking about the fringe ones, I'm talking about like the mainstream ones. But at the end of the day, they understood that the real enemy is not themselves, but it's basically the Arabs that want to drive them into the sea. And if they don't get the shit together, they will be driven into the sea. And I would say the same thing to the Canadians. And I'm not saying when I say get your shit together, I don't mean in a condescending way, but I mean it's very clear, all this infighting in the Jewish world is it is what it is, but it's also, the Canadian Jewish community, like other Jewish communities around the world, could be at a very serious crossroads where it's either we're going to keep the infighting and we're all kind of on paper going to say we're rowing in the same direction, but in practice we're really not. And if we continue this, as you said, it's a five stage alarm or whatever the term is, then we might not even be here in 10 years. So what does it matter
Mm.
who funds that building? And like that's potentially where this could go. And I think that should be impetus for getting everyone on the same page, getting in the same boat, rowing in the same direction. And if you do that, I think you can disrupt.
What I want to pick up on something you said earlier that's consistent with that. When you said, look at your own party, and maybe it's time for people who are Jewish to realize that you need to defend Jews and Judaism before the environment. And that sounds pretty radical to a lot of people. I'm in constant argument with people who want to support, I think, what we used to call a liberal agenda. Now I would call very leftist. And they will say, but why do you think that fighting anti-Semitism is more important? And I say, because if I'm dead, I'm no use to the environment anyhow, right?
Well, that's what Golda Meir used to say in different words.
Right. But I think one of our participants has just sent a message that a lot of Jews are very woke and very into promoting the leftist agenda.
Correct.
Have you
Correct.
found a way to break through that? I would think, I don't know if in Canada it's as bad as in the US, but probably 30% of Jews who would say they support Israel, they are also very woke and they'll vote for parties that are against our best interest.
Yeah, that one I don't have a clear and obvious response to because what I learned in the last 3 years of running Future of Jewish and really seeing all the perspectives that you can see. I'm talking about in the mainstream. I'm not interested in the extremes on either side in the Jewish world, but really that core 80% of call it left to right, secular, religious, Israeli diaspora. And what I've seen is that, and it's the same in Israel. Not every person is, none of us here, by the way, are 100% Jewish. Each of us have a percentage of how that's a part of our identity, lifestyle, and priorities in life. And so for some people that might be 80%, for some people that might be 50%. It fluctuates also in life. You're not 80% or 20% your whole life, like of anything actually, right? Not just Jewish, but so people are constantly updating their identities and priorities and lifestyles. And I think that's one of the core issues is that when we talk about, and the woke Jews, which don't get me wrong, we've written a lot about them on our platform and not very nice things. So I definitely see that and understand the issue there. But it comes down to a question like I think for a lot of them specifically, but also other types of Jews, being Jewish is not what I would call a core part of their identity. It's just not. And being woke or progressive or whatever you want to call it, far left, is at the moment, at least. And so it's hard to have a conversation, as I'm sure most people here who have been in a business partnership or in a marriage or even just in a very close, long friendship, if the priorities and the sort of identities are not really aligned, not they don't need to be 100% aligned, but like if somebody's at a 70% Jewish identity and somebody else is at like a 20%, I mean, that's a pretty big gap. I don't know. I don't know what to do there. I think that, I think there's one article written that I haven't published yet by one of our guest writers who basically said we should excommunicate the anti-Zionist Jews. That might be extreme. Um, but there might be something to that because I grew up in a household where there's consequences for, it's not a free for all. You don't just get whatever you want. If you fall X, Y, and Z, you'll be rewarded. If you do A, B, and C, and we consider that not to be acceptable, there'll be consequences. And I feel that level of that creates discipline, that creates sort of boundaries and guardrails around um, what's acceptable and what's not. And if enough Jews think that it's unacceptable to have anti-Zionist Jews, woke Jews, whatever you want to call them,
Right.
that might also show that the woke Jews that hold on, I have to make a decision at this point. I can't have my cake and eat it too. So if I want to be in the woke community, which means I can't be in, the Jewish one, that I'm not welcome, literally not welcome, then that's a decision that I have to make. And I don't know, and I think that might be a good,
Yeah.
it's tough
That's
love,
what-
right? It's tough love,
yeah.
I personally am in the belief of tough
Good
love.
for you. I haven't heard anybody say that before, but I've often said jokingly we should bring back the Sanhedrin, and you just made it real for me, right? I really want to ask this question because someone took the time to send it from Holland. How can people better connect and collaborate with pro-Western movements worldwide? So if, for example, the majority, and we know that in many countries the people support us, but their governments don't. Look what's happening in Ireland. I see lots of Irish people writing and saying that they're angry with their government, they're pro-Israel. But how can people connect so they can be better organized in supporting Israel? And this comes specifically from one of our friends in Holland.
Supporting Israel is the question.
Yes, in supporting pro-Western movements, how can we connect them together? Because
I
I
mean,
guess what they're saying is this is not just a Jewish problem,
I agree.
right?
Yeah.
And you've said yourself, it's whether you call it anti-Zionism or anti-Semitism, really, it's eroding the fabric of our society, right?
100%.
And
Yeah.
so how do we elevate it and connect with others who see this problem?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and there's a lot, right, to unpack there. Um, I think I can't remember if it's in the top. It's like do what you can with what you have today. And I really think it starts at the individual basis, and I think it really starts with people. Um, I go back to my point about like I can't ignore the problems in my party because like it's like maybe that's not the right party to be in then. Like maybe like so I would start there on an individual level of like, can I align my actions with like I grew up like for example in a Democratic house, but I'm not a Democrat anymore because I updated my recalibrated. And so to me, voting for unfortunately in America when they have two parties, voting for the Republicans um now is my version of helping the Western world um you know uh stay the Western world, for lack of a better way to put it. You know, I created Future of Jewish, which I'm glad what you said before about this is not just an Israel or anti-Semitism issue, that it's really a civilizational thing. And that's something that we're going to be writing about a lot coming up, is that I'm tired of hearing I'm pro-Israel. It's not about Israel. It actually
Mhm.
has almost nothing to do with Israel. It's a question of, are you pro-West, which I'll just give a few examples of what that means. Law and order, like public safety. Like I'm gonna go outside and I can just walk to the store without being like harassed or kidnapped or whatever. So public safety, separation of church and state, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, et cetera, et cetera. Are you for those things? So then, if you are, then you're obviously pro-Israel. You don't have to say you're pro-Israel. Just an extension of that. And if you're not for those things, then yeah, you would probably be anti-Israel because Israel is a Western country with the exception of separation of church and state. But like that's how I would think about these things. I think it just on an individual level, recalibrate. There's no reason to try to persuade anyone else. If I don't know if you want to volunteer, I don't know. I think the vote is the most important thing. And if you have some money, I mean, maybe you can, I'm in favor if you have money and you've earned your money, or even if you inherit it and your parents earned it, I mean, use your money. Money's a big talker.
Hey, one of the things that you published, if I've read it correctly, is suggested that Jewish success isn't despite anti-Semitism, but because of it.
That's
Do
right.
you agree? What does that mean?
It means that people don't hate losers, they hate winners.
Ah,
Jealousy. So if and also if you're in a culture where if you're winning, it means I'm losing and I don't want to be a loser. So I have to instead of trying to do the things that would make me a winner, I'm just gonna try to tear down the winner so that like you know what I mean? It's two different approaches. And so yeah, the Jews have been successful because well because they had to be successful for survival reasons. But then when we became successful, that created more anti-Semitism because it's like how could you become successful when we ostracized you and kicked you out of our countries and wouldn't let you buy land and own farms like and we still were successful. So now they're just like, wait, what? Like that's not how we pictured this going. Does that make sense?
I guess so, yes. Several people have commented on what they consider very poor PR or propaganda coming out of Israel.
Mhm.
You're in Israel. Do people there see it the same as the diaspora, wondering why is it that Israel is not doing better at PR?
It's a philosophical conversation that I was preoccupied with for a long time. And like I said, I'm less concerned about things that are happening. When you say PR, I mean the implication is that it's like Israel needs to like do a better job of like explaining to the world or something. Like, no, Israel doesn't have to explain anything to anyone. Israel's job is to protect its people and create the best possible life for them. That's literally all of Israel has to do. Um, and like, so I don't think that's an issue, to be honest with you. Like, Israel could, like, okay, so I'm an entrepreneur, so I solve problems for a living. You can go and solve that problem, that PR problem. That's not going to change the level of anti-Semitism or the level of um, animosity or issues between Israel and like it's not going to change. It's not because
But
people are going to
maybe
find
it's
other things to point to. Israel's just a convenient thing to point to because there's a war every 5 to 7 years and Israel always wins. And when you put up a bunch of doctored images and fabrications, and Israel looks like the bully that's being using disproportionate force and doing all this other nonsense that we all know is not true. They're always going to find something. And so I don't think we need to be preoccupied so much about what's our image in the world or even amongst Jewish communities. Like the Jewish community in Toronto, for example, like it's not the community in Toronto's job is to advocate for the things that protect the Jewish community and allow the people in that community to thrive and to have every opportunity that everyone else in Toronto has, type of thing. It's not to project some kind of, image to other people. Does that make sense?
sort of, I can see the argument on both sides. I think
It's
from the
philosophical for
diaspora
sure.
perspective, we want Israel to give us the messages. Well, let me give it to you very simply, actually, having just said the messages. We we cannot seem to come up with a simple message like free Palestine from the river to the sea. How is it with all the brilliant PR people we haven't come up with one single message that everybody could get behind?
Well, they did have a message at the beginning of the war, which is Hamas is ISIS, which I thought was quite effective. Um, but that's what I'm saying. It's not a messaging problem. It's not if we come up with a better slogan, everything's going to get better. It's not going to get better because an anti-Semite is always going to
Mhm.
find whatever they're looking for. And so I think what we do need to get better at is maybe the messaging within the Jewish world, which I think is kind of what you were asking. And that goes back to what I was kind of saying with the Jewish community in Toronto is that, you know, the Jewish, the organized Jewish world is going to have to make some hard decisions coming up because we're not all rowing in the same direction. We have, as I'm
That's
sure you guys know,
true.
and it's not even politically, it's just like, some synagogues, for example, are very Zionist, which to me is every synagogue should be Zionist because there's no Judaism without Israel. It's just historically uh, illiterate to think otherwise. And then you have some synagogues that are not. And so prior, and I don't even think it's about politics. I think it's just like, oh, like we want to start like so the
Actually,
messaging is
that was
really
the
good.
question I was going to ask because it was one of the first things you spoke of, and that was about the role of synagogues. And I wanted to ask you whether you thought rabbis and such um, leaders, particularly because they're not political, should now be, I want to say be more political, but you've answered it by saying more Zionist. I think it's very confusing that some synagogues won't fly the Israeli flag.
Yeah. Yeah, the only thing I can think of is like public safety or I don't know. But yeah, I mean, if it's from a like trying to make a statement of like we're not Zionists, like that's stupid. You're not a Jew. If you're just not.
Right.
And that's kind of goes back to the whole argument of like should we quote unquote excommunicate anti-Zionist Jews? And it's like yeah, maybe like we should really consider that because there has to be a certain sort of criteria or parameters. This is not a free for all. Like you can't just call yourself a Jew because of whatever your reasons are. Like there's a certain what I call basic kind of criteria, if you will, for what it means to be Jewish. And then there's some additional stuff that some people like, but then the flip side is that is like, well, this is like eating kosher. Do you have to eat you know what I mean? So that's where it becomes a slippery slope. But yeah, there's no simple, but I will say one thing that fundamentally believe is simple is that you cannot be Jewish without a connection to Israel. And it's not even about supporting Israel. It's such a stupid word, support. Like, do you support Austria? Like, I don't even know what that means.
Right. Right.
Like, so yeah, but yeah, if you don't have a relationship with Israel and you consider yourself to be Jewish, there's something seriously wrong with your Jewish compass.
I think
That I would say
the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Oliver Shalom, said it very simply. There is no Judaism without Zionism.
it doesn't exist.
It doesn't
It doesn't
exist.
exist.
Now, several people have mentioned in the chat that we shouldn't even use the word anti-Semitism anymore, but Jew hatred. Do you think that makes a difference? Do you think anti-Semitism is a complex term that too many people have tried to define and messed up?
Yes, and I'm not sure like to what end, like what's the goal, right? Is like just changing it because we want to change it, or like what are we trying to like what's the goal? Is it trying to make people more aware of it? Like I said, I don't there's a lot of these um uh, there's a lot of these suggestions and it's Israel's image and Israel's communication with the world and changing and you can change them and I don't think there's anything wrong with them, but I just don't know what you're really going to gain substantially. And so I think that we have to be the hard a lot of the questions you're asking me are fundamentally very hard questions with no clear right or wrong answer, and which makes them great questions. But like these are the like these are the conversations and this is the conversations that our ancestors were having with
Mm.
Jewish philosophy and ethics, and so this is it's these are the kind of things that we have to be talking about as a people, um, and not like should we change anti-Semitism just because I don't think okay, what are we going to benefit from it? Like we're not going to get any more sympathy if you ask me. We're just
No, I think the value of dropping the word anti-Semitism, which is a word coined by an anti-Semite to begin with, is that you just stop defining what does anti-Semitism mean and you just say Jew hatred. This is about Jew hatred. We're Jews, there are people that hate us, it's irrational. That's what we're talking about.
right, and that makes a lot of sense, but I don't think that's going to get rid of the hatred or create any more sympathy than we already have. Like I don't think it's going to convert anyone.
No, but it just maybe shortens the conversation. You stop trying to explain it. I want to
That's true.
also, I want
That's
to point out, I don't want to miss this, which is that in the Q&A, several people have said, sign up for Izzy, sign up for Future of Jewish. So I want to just reiterate that because I do find it's It's an excellent resource, very thoughtful pieces. I know that you have several writers. I often look just to see where your articles are, Joshua. I really enjoy reading them. So if you want to say anything more about the future of Jewish, what is your goal, your mission? Please do. Go ahead.
Definitely. And I'll just say one more comment. I mean, I think that's the key here is that when we rely on rabbis are good for doing what rabbis are supposed to do, which is frankly like Jewish literacy, like Torah, Talmud, like that's their job. Their job is not to tell us who to vote for. Uh, and I'm talking about people outside of Israel. Israel's a little different in that capacity, but it's not to tell us, they might say, hey, I'm concerned that a certain candidate might infringe upon our safety, but that's what rabbis have to do. And so, and then the extension of that is synagogues, right? Like synagogues are there as like a school. They can't, but the beautiful part about the tools, Izzy and Future of Jewish, and there's many, many more. We're just two of the many tools. And hopefully, there'll be more tools like a Jewish app and things of that nature, is that now I think people can get it on their time, in their home, in their day-to-day life. And that in and of itself, I think, will bring a lot of more Jews into the tent, right? Which is like clearly there's no difference between Judaism and Zionism. So if I want to consider myself Jewish and live a Jewish life, like I have to have a relationship with Israel, whether it's because I watch Israeli TV shows, or I go to Israel once a year, or I donate to an organization, or I have an Israeli friend. But these platforms are our future. And if you can take the new with the old, which is the institutions, that to me is for all of us here going to put the Jewish world in the best position. And so Izzy, I'm actually not part of Izzy anymore. I started the company. I sold my shares. So I'm sure if you just Google Izzy and I don't know what the latest the URL is because I sold my shares like 2 years ago, so they might have changed it. So I don't want to give you the wrong one. Uh, and then Future of Jewish is futureofjewish.com.
Great. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughtfulness and for writing and for being really, to many people, a very young upstart, a hero on behalf of all of us. I really appreciate it. And want
Thank
to
you
wish
for having me. I'm
everybody,
definitely not a definitely not a hero, but I'm just trying to do my part. And if we all do our part, I think we'll be in good shape.
appreciate it. And I want to wish a good day to everybody. Hanukkah's coming up, so an early Chag Sameach. Everybody take care. Be
Chag
safe.
Sameach. Thank you so
Bye for
much.
now.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.